saw the sun after a while, and hopefully he stays the same for many months. And that's wishing something, isn't it?
It was very cold yesterday, though.
Oh, very cold. It was. It's been a cold year so far.
Yeah.
And fingers crossed. Hopefully, we'll see more of the sun in the coming months.
I hope so, but usually it's raining, isn't it? When I speak to many of my American friends, as we will do in a few moments with Deborah, and I say, "Have you ever been to London?" They say, "Yes." What did you see? Rain. That's all they see, rain.
They're spot on.
Nothing else. And I'm sure when we ask Deborah if she's been to London, I'm sure she'll have something similar to say. With that, I would like to introduce our guest today, who is Deborah Ostreicher, all the way from Arizona in the United States. She's the CEO of Distinguished Communications, and her organization help people to become better and effective speakers, and they help businesses build effective communication strategies. Deborah has won numerous awards, and I'd be here for the next 5 minutes if I was to run through every single award she and her company have won, but no doubt Deborah will share that with us throughout this evening. Good afternoon or good evening, Deborah.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
I'm great here in warm and sunny Arizona.
Aren't you lucky?
Very lucky.
Have you ever been to London?
Not only have I been there, but I have lived there, and I can tell you it's probably one of the driving forces that led me to lead my life, or at least my home base here in sunny Arizona. But I will tell you, having been there just a couple of weeks ago in your parts, you remember that really warm and sunny weekend you had a couple of weekends ago?
Oh, that
was me.
That's the one that you brought with you.
Exactly. Although when my friends from the UK and colleagues come here, for some reason, it's the only time we ever see rain. So what does that mean?
No comment. In fact, I was in Florida last year in July at the National Speakers Association convention, and we had a storm. So maybe that was me bringing bad luck to the convention, but there you have it. Now, Deborah, I know you're very passionate about helping businesses and people become effective communicators. And I'd like you to share with our listeners, where did your journey start?
Well, I will tell you, and I'll also tell you that as a communicator, I am very expressive. And I have a question I should have asked you before we went live, but I'm just going to ask you now in front of all your listeners is, can your listeners see me as well?
Yes, they can. They can see you on Facebook Live.
So then I can demonstrate with big hand gestures.
Of course you can.
So where did my journey begin? Let me just tell you that it began with learning at a very early age that effective communication really gets you what you want. And it's certainly, I would say, Mom, if you're listening, it certainly did as a child, but more importantly, now for your listeners in life and in business, I believe that the most effective communicators are really achieving what they set out to do, both in their lives and in their business.
Okay, good. And lots of people struggle with either becoming effective communicators and more so with standing up in public and speaking. Does that resonate with you when you started your journey, or was it a bit more easier for you perhaps?
You know, my journey of communication really began with probably early on being put on stage as a dancer and a musician at 5 years old, and getting some feedback from the connection of bringing joy to an audience, even at 5 years old, and following through my career even today. I certainly not performing in Covent Garden or on Broadway, but still doing community theater because I love that interaction of an audience and the feedback of a live audience that you can't get any other way. And the same holds true in presentation. When you are delivering an effective presentation and you can see that connection with the audience and that it has meaning, that still drives me to this day. So to your point of, are people afraid? Unfortunately, many say that people would rather be in the box than behind the box.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, at a funeral, a lot of people would rather be in the casket than behind the lectern giving the eulogy.
Absolutely. And from your own experience, what kind of things can people do to overcome the nerves and the anxiousness of giving their first speech?
You know, I have a chapter in the new book, The Art of Effective Communication, that is specifically dedicated to this topic. So I'm really glad that we get to share. I actually have 10 hot tips. I don't know if we'll get through all of them today, but 10 tips about being effective in that. And the more you know you're being effective and feeling confident, that itself can really address the fear factor a lot. So I'd like to share some of those tips today, even if we don't get to all of them. The first of which is that focusing on emotion, your emotion and your passion for the subject, if you can find what that is from the very beginning, that will alleviate a lot of your fears.
Mm-hmm.
So what I mean by that is that you can be persuasive. If you've ever dealt with somebody who feels so passionately about something, they have a unique ability to persuade you or get you to take action merely because it can be contagious. And so the more effective you're being and the more contagious that you can be, that will help with your confidence. And the more confident you feel, the less fearful you will feel.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. And what kind of things, is that emotionally connecting with yourself or emotionally connecting with the audience?
So it's really both. And it means that first, if you can find why people have a tendency, it's just habitual, especially in business, to walk into a presentation with their objective being, I want to share information. People, I just want them to have this information. And without focusing on, why do I care? What am I passionate about with regard to this? And why am I even sharing it? And if you don't start with that, you can't even get to your own emotional connection.
Okay.
And from there, you can set your goal of, what do I want to accomplish from this? And what do I want people to gain from this? So you walk into a presentation and you say, well, I just want to give them an update, or I just want to share the latest data. Taking the time to stop and ask yourself, why? Why am I sharing this? Why do I care about it? And then, even more importantly, what's in it for them? And what will they get out of it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And those are tough questions.
They are, but they are very important questions because they enable a speaker to really discover why they're speaking and what their real purpose is. But we shall talk more about that in a few moments. So I shall now pass you over to my co-host, Hasib, who has a few questions for you.
Hi, Deborah. How are you?
Hi, Hasib.
Thank you for joining us, first of all, Deborah. Deborah, regarding, you mentioned effective communication. During your journey at the start, did you have a mentor for this? Or was it something that, yes, you did? How did that help you through your journey?
Such a great question. I'm such a huge proponent of mentoring, not only in business, but in the local community with at-risk and homeless children. Mentoring is just a huge part of my life. And so, yes, I did have a mentor, in fact, several when it comes to communication. With regard to presentation skills, I had a mentor over 20 years ago who helped me realize all of the things I'm talking to you about today, as a matter of fact. And to this day, even though I am a coach now and this is my profession, I continue to get feedback because I believe you can always grow and always get support from a mentor, because you can't watch yourself and you can't be given feedback by your friends and family members, you have to have somebody who can give you an independent eye and help you see the things you're doing great and the things that you need improvement on, because we're not good at telling each other this.
No, you're absolutely right. Also, when you find out you're not good at, you need to improve on something, some people take that adversely, thinking, this is criticism by myself. No, I do that well. They don't understand why they have, why the mentor has mentioned this. How do you start thinking positive, how to improve yourself if your mentor has criticized you in some aspect of your presentation or your work or anything like that? How do you come over that?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because I think there are a lot of people who claim to be coaches, guides, mentors in all kinds of fields of expertise. And in this one in particular, it can be very raw and very difficult to take feedback, because when you're standing up in front of a group, it's different than, say, hitting a baseball or kicking a football. It can be a totally different thing. And so getting feedback can be, as you suggested, a negative experience and feel like criticism. And I think as far as the philosophy that I was mentored on and that I now coach with is very much focused in bringing out the positive attributes of the speaker. So rather than saying, you did this wrong and you did this wrong, it's much more about not only confidence building, but pulling out the very essential things that are working for an individual presenter, and making sure the more we can bring out about that, the better the presentation will become. So there are a lot of philosophies about criticizing or counting the number of times someone says or but the way that I work is to bring out the positive. And so to your point about how do you take criticism, you have to find the right match and the right coach.
No, spot on. I think that's brilliant advice. Also, many awards that you won. There was an award that you won for mentoring kids. How was that experience?
Wow. I would say in summary, we mentors in any profession or charity work get more out of it, I think, or we wouldn't do it. In fact, when I come back to what's in it for them, I would say really the kids get a lot out of it, but it's really about what's in it for the mentors. So as far as that experience, my husband and I mentor homeless children here in Arizona. And it means that when children are put into a homeless shelter, their parents are given the opportunity to sign them up for a mentor. And we work with the kids, whether it's take them for an ice cream or to a movie or work with them on schoolwork, just to try and give them some consistency and normalcy, because they're often moving around 20, 30 times a year, not only to different places to sleep, but different schools. So this gives them some normalcy in their life. So I was honored to be awarded for that, but really the award goes to all of the people who do this kind of work.
No, it's brilliant, fantastic job you done there. Now I'm just going to go on business on that. Regarding small businesses, what do you think that makes them successful? The small businesses.
Wow, that's a loaded question. I guess it depends on the type of business, but when it comes to communication, I would say this is often overlooked as a last minute investment or something that people are just, quote, winging it. I hear that all the time. Somebody comes to me for coaching and I say, well, what do you do now to prepare? And they say, oh, well, I just wing it. And I would say with regard to small business, and as I said at the opening of the show, this is one of the most important investments that you can make to be successful. So paying close attention to what are you communicating and why are you communicating it, whether it's with your vendors, your employees, no matter what, it deserves thoughtful investment of some kind. And I don't mean necessarily financially. I mean, even in just your time, to think about what is your message, why are you delivering it, and how can you make it most effective? That, to me, can dramatically impact small business.
Effective communication for small businesses. as you mentioned. What sort of platforms can they use to target the customers that they would want, small businesses?
Well, there's so many different mediums these days. In fact, I have the great pleasure of working with clients where this is their expertise, particularly whether it be in digital or otherwise, whereas mine is more about the live interaction. What is happening live? How can you be most effective in that? So whether it's a staff meeting in a small business or even in a large business, when you sit down with your employees, did you think about the purpose of that meeting? Why are you having it? What do you expect the outcome to be for yourself as a leader and for the people walking out the door when it's over? What did you set out to achieve, and did you achieve it? And my argument would be you can only achieve it if you know what you've set out to achieve to begin with, and then how do you measure whether you did or not? So that would just be one small example of how live communication can make a difference in your business.
Hi, Deborah. It's Shaz here again.
Hi there.
Hi. With your media training that your business offers clients, what are some of the tips you could give somebody who's looking to go and give an interview to the media?
So there are a lot of different reasons one may be giving a media interview. It may be totally just as an expert in a non-controversial situation where that's one of the best because you can really just shine giving some very specific points. Again, the worst words I can ever hear is just winging it. So being prepared, thinking of in this very short amount of time, because media interviews are usually very, very short. Unlike this lovely program on a radio show, a media interview is generally under 2 minutes. So thinking, what can I get across in 2 minutes in this non-controversial situation and being ready for that. But there's also pre-planning in a crisis situation where you may be on the spot and working very closely with an expert. Your spokesperson isn't necessarily your expert on the issue, but they may need to be the one who's out there. So working very closely with whoever your expert is on what are your main points, and no matter what you are being asked, how can you, what we call in media, bridge? How can you bridge back to that main issue that you want to cover and be clear and open and direct about your messaging?
That's very good advice. And sometimes certain journalists tend to ask very tough and challenging questions, especially during a time of crises. Are there any particular tips that you have to help our listeners if they were in that particular situation where they're being asked very tough questions, how they could address or how they could attempt to answer those questions?
Yes, and I'm so glad you're asking this because, again, coming back to preparedness, this is something that is so important. And one of the things that I do with organizations in preparing for this is to go through, and with all my years of experience in corporate and in government and having been asked those questions myself, I have a good way to anticipate that, and any expert you're working with should be able to do that, where they will go through and make out a list of every possible question that reporter might ask and rehearse with you in advance, even if you've only got a short amount of time, and prepare you for, well, what if they ask this? What if they ask that, to get you ready? But a tip to your point of, well, what do you do if you're not ready or they ask you something that you just didn't prepare for, which I hope wouldn't happen? There's always answers like this. I'm not able to answer that right now, but I can tell you this, and to go back to your main point.
Mm-hmm. That's a good little technique.
If you watch for it, you'll see it on the news any night.
Yep, absolutely. And it's about being honest, isn't it? Saying, I don't have the answer to that, but what I can share with you, so kind of diverting them and taking them back to where you want to take them, I guess.
Right. And there's a few reasons why you may not have the answer. You may simply not have the answer because it's a fact that you just don't have in your head. At the same time, it may just be something you don't want to answer. Or in working a lot with police, I find there are things they say, it's under investigation. I am not allowed, I am not permitted to answer that question. However, I can tell you this, or I will be back to you when we know more. There's that, but there's also just plain, avoiding the question. And that happens a lot, and that's very real. But if you're practiced at it and you have a lot of good go-to messages, things that you're trying to get out there that you're ready with, it helps you make that bridge between, I'm not able to answer that right now, but I can tell you this.
Just like a very good politician. They're good at not answering questions. Yeah. So I'm sure they have plenty of media training before they are grilled by journalists.
Some not so good.
Some not so good. Yeah. A few come to mind, but we'll park that up for today, Deborah. In terms of somebody who wants to become a better speaker and they don't know where to start, what advice would you give to them?
Well, I think for sure, if it's something that is important, whether it's presentation skills or just general communication skills, finding a good coach, whatever city or country in the world you're living in, finding a good coach is important. And just because you meet someone who says they do that doesn't mean they're the right fit for you. So interviewing somebody, any good coach is more than willing to be interviewed and have a meeting with them about how they work, what their philosophy is, how they would help you, and why they're a good match for your business. So I would say that's definitely the first place to start. But there's also a lot of good books and readings, and I say these days, because it's become kind of trendy to be a good presenter, watch TED Talks, watch any storytellers projects. There's a lot of good lessons to be taken just by watching others.
That's good advice. And obviously there's organizations like Toastmasters, for example, who also help people to gain more confidence, don't they?
And what I'd say about that is, just like finding the right coach, my experience is that Toastmasters groups can be very helpful and aren't always. And so it may be that you go down the road to a group that meets over here and it just doesn't feel like a good fit, and you're not feeling like you're getting that positive and professional feedback that you need to be successful, but yet the group down here that meets at an hour later is a much better fit for you. So if that's the type of feedback that you're looking for in an organization, that try a couple until you find the right group and a good fit.
Absolutely. And obviously becoming or giving a good or a superb presentation is only part of the story, I guess, because although it's not a performance as such, we can see it, we can think of it as a performance, but the main thrust of that particular performance is the way that the speech is structured. Do you have any tips on how to write a good speech or presentation?
I do. I'm so glad you asked. In fact, I have my in trademark now. I haven't received my final trademark license on this from the United States, but my philosophy is called grab, give, and get out. And it's a 3-part structure to do exactly what you're talking about. And it involves this. First, it's critical in any length of presentation, whether it's an elevator pitch of 60 seconds or 6 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever size and time of speech that you have. It's critical very first to grab the audience attention effectively. And the way to do that is to know who is your audience, who are you talking to, what's in it for you, and what's in it for them. And once you know that, you'll have a much easier time grabbing the attention. And what I mean by that is, I think most people have a tendency to start a presentation with...
Deborah, you're going to make a very important point with grab, give, and get, but we're going to go towards a break. So I'll suggest you grab onto that point and you can give it to us straight after the break, which will be in 5 minutes time. So we'll join you in a few moments.
Products on groceries, vegetables, fruits and halal meat. All your favourite brands under one roof. We take payment by card, have free customer parking and offer a free local delivery service. Also available, PayZone for bill payments and money transfer services to Pakistan. Amar Food Store and Halal Meat. Now open at Lincoln Road Triangle. Call us on 01733 68 73 74. High in quality, low in prices. Third world and developing countries are home to some of the most vulnerable children on the planet. Malnutrition, severe lack of medical aid and access to clean water are just some of the horrific challenges faced by orphans across Africa and Asia. Children of Adam, a Peterborough charity, need your help to bring aid to these orphans for just £25 a month. To sponsor an orphan or assist with other projects, please call 0300 321 0032 or visit www.childrenofadam.net.
Need a great place to chill out? Look no further than The Lounge for quality food and drinks at a great price. Try our varied menu: pasta, seafood, burgers, grills, salad, soup, rice and sides. Also hot and cold drinks, milkshakes and mocktails. Leave room for our exquisite desserts. The Lounge, 417 Lincoln Road, Peterborough. Call 01733 709 306 to order for delivery. The Lounge, friendly service with a great atmosphere.
Gems and jewels. Wise sayings, interesting events, and moral lessons from Islamic history. He deserved a large endowment.
During the days of Hisham ibn Abdul Malik, a group of Arabs came to his court but were afraid to speak to him. Among them was a young man named Dirwas ibn Habib, who was only 16 years of age at the time. Hisham spotted him among the group and said to his guard, "Now, anyone who wishes to enter and meet me may do so, even young children." Dirwas jumped forward and said, "O leader of the believers, we have been afflicted with 3 hard years. In the first, our fat melted away. The second year ate away our flesh, and the third affected our bones. In your hands you have surplus money. If that surplus is for Allah, then divide it among his slaves. And if it belongs to them, then why do you prevent that wealth from them? And if it is yours, then give it in charity to them. For indeed, Allah rewards those who give charity." Hisham said, "In each of the 3 scenarios, the young man left no excuse for me. He ordered for the group to be given 100,000 dinars, and for that young man to be given 100,000 dirhams."
If you want to learn about Islam and Muslims, stay tuned to Salam Radio 106.2 FM.
FM. I'm your host Shaz Nawaz, and I have in the studio with me my co-host Hasib. You're listening to the Empower Hour show. The purpose of our show is to inspire, motivate and empower you to achieve bigger and better things in your life. And we do that by inviting world-leading authorities who share their knowledge, experience and expertise and share key outcomes and positive action points for you to take away on a weekly basis. And from the feedback that Hasib and I get, we know that you enjoy the show very much. And as always, we enjoy your interaction and want to thank you for asking all the questions that you do ask. If you would like to ask our guest Deborah Ostraika a question today, you can do so by emailing us on studio@salamradio.co.uk. You can text and WhatsApp us on 077 45 278 978, or you can send us a message on Facebook. As I said earlier, our guest tonight is Deborah Ostraika. She's the CEO of Distinguished Communications, and she and her firm help people become better and more effective communicators, and they help organizations with their communication strategies. Good evening, or good afternoon, should I say, Deborah?
I'll take anything that has a good in front of it.
You were talking about the grab, give, get out just before I abruptly intervened before our break. So I think that would be a good point to get back to that, because you were about to share some golden nuggets with us.
Absolutely. The philosophy of grab, give, and get out is a great model to keep in mind when you have a limited amount of time, whether it's 60 seconds or 60 minutes, to get a point across. You'll want to grab the attention of your audience immediately, give the information that you have to give. I think of it as a gift even, and then get out. So we started talking about what does the grab mean? Let's just say, for example, you have 10 minutes to make a presentation to a prospective client or your staff or whoever the group may be. A certain portion of that time should be dedicated to just setting the stage and grabbing the audience attention as to why should they even listen to this. You and I spoke offline a bit about storytelling. Is there a way that you may grab the audience attention through a story that may be perfectly related to what you're about to share? Because again, grabbing attention isn't, hello, I'm Deborah Ostraika and I work for Distinguished Communications and I'm here to tell you X. Grabbing attention may be more effective by saying something like, have you ever been afraid when you have to get up and give a presentation? Or do you ever feel like you're not being effective in front of a group? I'm Deborah Ostraika of Distinguished Communications, and I have hot tips to help get you through it. Those simple opening questions are what I would call the difference between grabbing attention or giving that simple default introduction.
Absolutely. So that helps grab their attention and perhaps increase their level of enthusiasm and perhaps even create some intrigue, and then you move them on to giving. Is there a particular structure you use in terms of giving that information to your audience?
There is. I believe wholeheartedly in the rule of 3. And so no matter what it is that you are putting out there, chances are it fits nicely into 3 distinct areas. Some may be packed with information and some not so much. But if you think about what is the information you're looking to impart, and my clients and I go through an exercise where we write all of the messages up on a whiteboard, everything you want to get out there, and then pare them down into groups of what really goes together. And so I'd encourage your listeners to go through an exercise like this before a presentation of what's everything you want to get out there. Then start to group it together and see what's fitting. And more often than not, it'll start off by 3 pretty clear categories and then 1 or 2 things that just don't seem to go. And what I find is you don't really need them, or they'll come in another time. So as far as giving the information, 3 areas that your listeners can latch onto. And then we come to get out. And this is one of my favorites to teach because it makes such a difference for people in their communication. Do you want to know about it?
Of course we do.
Did I grab your attention?
You did.
So getting out. Now, gentlemen, you know, in most situations where you're in a presentation for business and people are finished, think about what do people do when they finish a presentation? What do they say? Can you think about that?
Yes, well, they usually will thank the audience perhaps for listening to them, and then they'll kind of walk off and don't kind of just leave everybody in a limbo state sometimes.
That's right. And they just sort of end it. Now, two things. One, hopefully by asking you that question rather than just telling you the answer to the question, I've asked it and I put it on you, the audience, to think about that. And hopefully your listeners are doing the same. Rather than me just rambling on and on, telling you information, I've asked you to think about it. So that's a way we talked about in the beginning of connecting with your audience. Any opportunity you have to do that, whether you're really expecting an answer or it's a rhetorical question, putting those questions out there is a great way to connect. Now, back to what you just said, which is absolutely true. How do you get out? Most people just say thank you. Or my other favorite, I don't really mean my favorite, is to say, any questions? And that's the end of their presentation. What a downer. Yeah. Have you experienced that?
Absolutely. On a number of occasions.
Yeah, it's just, and even some of the greatest presentations I've seen where it seems like maybe they've gotten some excellent coaching or they're just a naturally excellent speaker, and yet they finish what they're saying and then they just say, well, that's it. And as you said, they kind of may even physically start to disappear, like back up in a room or just go sit down. And what is the audience left with at that point? It's just sort of like, well, I guess they're done. Such a difference between that and formally and purposefully getting out. And by that I mean deciding in advance when you've grabbed the attention, you've given your information, and it's time to get out. What do? You decide in advance, here are the last things I am going to say. I am going to end with this great story or quote or posing a question or anything that you can leave the audience with, even literally saying, before I go, let me leave you with this. And knowing what that is in advance, saying it, and being done so you can get out makes a difference between an amateur and a professional presentation.
That's very good advice. Nice and simple to follow, and I love the alliteration, the grab, give and get out. So that should be very easy for our listeners to note down and of course save in their memory, so the next time that they're giving a speech they can use your 3-step model. And of course the words we use are part of the performance stroke presentation. Sometimes people tend to use visual aids, be it physical visual aids or be it a PowerPoint presentation. What are your thoughts on both of those?
Well, first of all, visuals should aid. And remembering that from the very beginning will help your listeners immensely. And so we may put visual aids up on a board behind us, but they don't always aid. They may be more of a crutch. And I hear that a lot from people where they say, well, I'm when we dig down of why are you really putting that up there? A lot of times the answer I'll hear, and somebody may be thinking that, one of your listeners right now, I'm hoping people will look at that instead of at me, which is very real. However, if you don't acknowledge that if you're there live giving a presentation, you are the presentations. The visual is to aid you. I would think of it more as wallpaper, something you may reference, but then know and acknowledge that eyes are back on you. And so I guess you're wondering, so how do you make that visual aid effective, aren't you?
We are, but one other observation that I have, which I'm sure you hear a lot, is sometimes speakers say, well, I've got the slides there to help me remember what's coming up next. And they can't, and I'm thinking, well, if you're the speaker, you should know your presentation pretty much inside out, or know it fluently enough to be able to give it without the slides, because like you've said, the slides are there to help put across a particular point for the audience, as opposed to remind you what's coming next.
That's right. And that's such an insightful way to express it, because again, it's all about your audience. The most important person or people in the room during a presentation is the audience. The people, whether it's your one-on-one across from the boss or in front of 1,000 people, they are the most important. And everything you are giving them should be thought of as a gift, not your own notes. And I'm a big believer in notes. So as you say, if your presentation behind you is your notes, that's, I think, asking for trouble for a couple of reasons. Number one, what if the electric PowerPoint or whatever system you're using, what if it fails? Then where are you? But also, have you ever had people read their electronic presentation to you?
Yeah.
Nothing makes me angrier, really. I mean, certainly something else. But boy, if I'm sitting in a presentation and someone, first of all, turns around, so what are we looking at when they do that? They turn around, and now you're getting sort of a presentation to you, which is somebody looking at the wall behind them. And to me, it's not only unprofessional, but can consciously or subconsciously feel to the audience as very disrespectful.
Death by PowerPoint and bullet point, I guess.
That's right. And you know that those presentation softwares were not developed for text and words, which is why it can be a bit cumbersome to add them in. Text and words are an addendum to what they were developed for, which is visuals, pictures, and graphs. But when someone puts something up there, especially a graph, and they say, I know you can't read this, but
Yeah.
Why did they put it up there? Read it, and they know you can't read it. It's a crutch. So getting away from that crutch and thinking to yourself, what would truly aid? What visual would aid in my making this point as a live presenter here in front of you right now? What would be an aid to help drive my message home that you can see and appreciate?
Yes. So what makes good visual aids, Deborah?
First of all, acknowledging that there's more to visual aids than electronic mediums with a screen behind you. We've defaulted to this. In fact, I've heard many people talk about that in their organizations, they are told they must do one, whether it fits their presentation or not. And so asking them to go back to their supervisors or go back to that CEO, if that's who I'm working with, to say, is that really the best medium? Sometimes it might be, but sometimes it might not be. And so defaulting to that and asking yourself, am I defaulting, is the first step to getting well with presentations. Mm-hmm. And asking yourself, what else could I use to demonstrate my point visually? It might be, and I'm not kidding here, it might be as simple as a white big pad of paper and a color marker where you put something up there in front of the audience, right in front of them, even if you're not an artist. But drawing that visual for your audience in front of them has a whole other dimension of connecting with them. Or a prop, something that rather than showing a picture of whatever the thing is, if the audience size is such that bringing the thing in with you and showing it, passing it around so that people can touch and feel or even see it in front of you, that's visual. So starting to think about what are some other ways I can connect with visual people in the room to help demonstrate my point. It might be electronic medium and a handout that you give, as well as a prop altogether.
That's very good advice, and I think most people tend to just focus on PowerPoint slides as opposed to thinking about other visual aids, be it props or even using a flip chart or using something else which can assist them. And you've given some very good pointers there. I think Hasib has some questions from our listeners. So over to you, Hasib.
I do indeed. Deborah, a listener has come to the question, what or who has been your greatest influence in business and why?
Well, I've been so lucky. You asked me earlier about mentoring, and I have had many mentors in my life. I'm so fortunate, which is probably why I'm such an advocate of mentoring. But I've had 3 distinct mentors who I can look to, who have helped me in business. One I mentioned earlier, who really taught me the art of effective presentation and connecting emotionally with the audience. Another taught me to always talk to people whenever in doubt. Email and other forms of electronic communication are never a good substitute for getting up out of your chair, even if it's all the way down the hall, and walk down and talk to that person and say, we're exchanging a lot of emails here. How can we connect and talk about this? And then the third, I would say, taught me to enjoy it and have fun and find the fun and the humor in everything I'm doing, because once you lose the fun and the humor, then your day is not going to be as good.
You're absolutely right. You've got to enjoy what you're doing.
And they were all women, by the way, if that matters to any of the female listeners out there. Those 3 women mentors I had.
I've got another question regarding that scenario you just mentioned, women. What would you say are the skills needed to be a successful woman in business?
You gentlemen asked some very loaded questions there, and I don't know that we can address that all in this program, but having
a few pointers.
Having a coach to help build up your confidence with regard to your communication, I think, since that's my area of expertise, that's where I would focus, is critically important, because as women, a lot of us have a tendency to not feel as confident. I was raised in male industries of computers and aviation, and always surrounded by men, and especially when I was at a much younger age than I am now, that wasn't always easy. It wasn't always easy to be heard. So having a coach to help you build your confidence in communication, so that when you have an idea as a woman, you're not feeling like you need to use language that women often use of, well, I'm not sure if this is a good idea, but you might maybe think about considering possibly. That's often the way that women present ideas. And it's not always received as well as it could be if it were delivered confidently. The second tip I would give is about watching upspeak. And this is another way that women have a tendency in many cases to speak that cannot be taken as seriously. And by that I mean talking like this. A lot of women tend to end their sentences with an upward inflection. And consciously or not, it's not always taken as seriously. So as women, I would watch those 2 things for starters.
No, it's brilliant advice. Brilliant advice for the listeners. Another question is, what do you do for fun or relaxation, away from business, away from work?
Well, relaxation isn't so easy for me. That's something I'm working on. I think I need a relaxation coach. Traveling is my passion. I love, and it's so wonderful that I'm able to work with clients around the world. It gives me a chance to travel and see other cultures and work with other cultures, which is my other passion, is learning about what works in communication. And I know you asked about relaxation, but for me, language and culture and what makes people work together easily. That's something that's so interesting for me. But then lastly, I would say what I mentioned earlier, working with these homeless, disadvantaged children is so rewarding for my husband and I that's something that we spend a lot of our extra time on.
You're doing a brilliant job there. Fantastic job. Last question before passing you back to Shaz. It's a question from one of the listeners. Excluding yours, what company or business do you admire the most and why?
One of the companies I admire the most for their messaging and communication is probably Southwest Airlines. And the reason I say that is because I've had the opportunity to see their leadership speak in a lot of different forums, and they are very connected not only to their own staff, but to their customers. And they have a way of communicating that lets you know that they care not only about their company, but about their employees. And through connected employees who are feeling empowered, that enables them to work closely with their customers. And so that's one of the companies philosophically that I really admire a lot.
That's brilliant. Shouts to yourself.
Okay, Deborah, I will bring you back to public speaking because that's an area of interest for many of our listeners from the conversations I've had with them over the many months. Lots of people have a certain fear of speaking in public. I know we kind of addressed that earlier on this evening. Are there any other tips you have to help people overcome that fear?
Yes, and most people would just stop at the word practice. And I agree. However, I have a caveat because it depends what you're practicing. So you can practice and practice and practice, but if you're practicing the wrong thing, then you might get really good at doing something really poorly. So practice, yes, but practicing the right things is where I would start. So of course your listeners would say, well, how do I know if I'm practicing the right things? Well, it's complicated because if you don't have a coach, then you're kind of stuck with either relying on friends or colleagues or making sure you're tapping into, is what I just did effective? Did I get the client? Did it work? And measuring yourself. So whatever way you do it, yes, practice is important, as long as you're practicing the right things. But there's some other things you can do to lower your fear as well. And one I would say is to make sure you're emotionally connected, that you know what's driving you and why you're making that presentation, because the more you're speaking from the heart, the more effective you will be. If you're trying to just read a speech to somebody or present somebody else's material, of course you're going to be very nervous. It's not coming from here. And when I say coming from here and being connected to it, doesn't mean you can't use notes to remind yourself. But then when you are giving the information, it must be coming from you. And I don't think you should be presenting on anything that you don't know the information. So reminding yourself of what it is and knowing that you're speaking from a knowledge base, because most people aren't out there presenting information they don't really know in their head. Where they get nervous is because they're worried they're going to forget what they memorized or lose their place on a very complicated sheet of notes, or they're trying to present somebody else's information. If you go back to basics, what's important to me, what's important to them, and what are the main points I want to get out there? I know this information. Here's a reminder, and go out and talk about it.
Absolutely. We have about 30 seconds, so very quickly. Sometimes the room goes cold or becomes very hostile, or the audience kind of come across as being very unforgiving. Any final quick tips on how to get the room on your side?
Well, one of the best ways is kind of coming back to the media training and knowing that you've got a message that you want to get out there. So if people are saying all kinds of things that you're not interested in, it's time to just say, let me just leave you with this. And it accomplishes two things. It grabs the room again, and it also gives you the opportunity to get out on your terms, not on somebody's weird question they just asked, and that's the last thing everybody's left with.
Thank you very much, Deborah. It's been fantastic having you here. You've shared some fantastic insights, and I know our listeners have enjoyed it very much. So thank you for being with us. And listeners, we shall join you next week.